When the world is just too much, turn it off and turn on positive, encouraging K-Love.
I'm gonna praise.
World off. K-Love on.
K-Love is sunshine for my soul.
I love K-Love.
Listen now on your radio, online, or on the free K-Love app.
K-Love makes me feel so good.
Positive, encouraging K-Love.
Welcome back to the History of the Papacy Podcast. I'm Steve, your host, and we are a member of the Agora Podcast Network. I'm really excited for today's conversation with Marco Cappelli of the Storia d'Italia podcast. Marco's podcast is a history of Italy, but in the Italian language. Our conversation is in English today, as I don't speak Italian, but Marco does speak excellent English. As you well know, I have a hard enough time in English as it is, so I'm glad we didn't get too much into Italian. Our conversation today is a wrap-up of many of the topics we've discussed in the History of the Papacy podcast going back years and years, and I think this is an excellent episode for the first episode of the year 2020 or 2020. We get to look back at the topics we've talked about in the podcast, but with someone who can give us an on-the-ground perspective, an Italian perspective on the important events where papal and Italian history intersected. As we progress in our story, events in papal and Italian history will be more and more intertwined, and I definitely hope to speak to Marco in the future. Also, we're starting up with the Podcaster of the Month again for the Agora Podcast Network. This month's featured podcast is The Cannonball. The hosts of this podcast, Claude and Daniel, are going through the entire canon of literature as presented by Harold Bloom. It's a very interesting and detailed project. If you want to learn more about the Cannonball or Storia d'Italia podcast, you can go to their respective websites, which can be found in the show notes. On with our conversation with Marco, and I hope you enjoy. Welcome back to another episode of the History of the Papacy podcast. I am so happy to be joined today by Marco Cappelli, who is the host of Storia d'Italia, which is a history of Italy in the Italian language. The history, obviously, the history of the papacy and the history of Italy are completely intertwined. And I'm really excited today to get a perspective of the papacy and the history of the papacy and Italy through the perspective of an Italian and the Italian culture and the Italian point of view. Thank you so much for coming on today, Marco.
Oh, it's my pleasure, really. And I was telling you before, it's my first interview in English, so I'm also glad.
Well, you've come on to the perfect place to, we're very excited. We love to get different perspectives on this podcast.
Oh, I noticed.
This is going to be perfect.
I'm an avid listener, so I noticed.
Marco, maybe you can tell us a little bit about your podcast and how you got started in podcasting.
Sure. So, of course, I was an avid listener before being a producer. And I started with Mike Duncan, The History of Rome. I think a lot of people did. And I moved on many other podcasts. And at a certain point, I thought, okay, let me go see what's available in my language, the history of Italy in Italian, to see another perspective. And I was shocked to see that there was none. There were a few of history podcasts in Italian, but not a narrative podcast, comprehensive. So I thought, that's interesting. And then after a couple of months, and this I'm talking about mid-2018, so a little over 1 year ago, I thought, well, why not me? So I did a bit of research of how to do it, got a microphone, and then got a lot of research on history, which has always been my passion. So, it's something that I love to do. And yes, I think there was a real thirst for content in Italian. Maybe it will come as a shocker, but not all Italians speak English. Actually, a minority do. So of course, I think it's important to produce content in the tongue of the country.
Oh yeah, absolutely. I think that's definitely, it's so important. Now in Italy and the Italian languages, you said there's some history podcasts. Is the podcasting, has it spread into other areas?
I will think podcast is more developed in other areas. So marketing, there are really hundreds and thousands of podcasts. For some reasons, I think that educational podcast is really starting right now. And in general, I think Italy is a few years behind America when it comes to podcasting. So it's growing a lot right now. So it's an exciting time to start a podcast in Italian in that sense. But yeah, I think there are other topics that are more developed for whatever reason. I think probably the academic the academic world was not too interested into it yet, or doesn't know too much about it yet. So there are not a lot of podcasts produced by professional historians because, well, maybe it was clear from the beginning, but I'm no professional historian. I'm just a person really passionate about history.
Yeah, it's interesting. I was just speaking with a professional academic. He's not a historian, but he had a lot of theories about why professional academics don't get into podcasting or history podcasting as such as we do. It's obviously well researched and informational, but it's also, there's an entertainment aspect to it. And there's a lot of reasons why professionals might not be drawn towards that. And maybe even the academic culture of, say, Italy as opposed to the United States, there could be reasons even amongst those different cultures that might prompt some academics to be even more leery, you might say, of getting involved in podcasting to a general audience.
There is one exception, I will say, which is a bit strange. The most famous historian in Italy is called Alessandro Barbero. And by the way, he's usually also translated in other languages, so I bet there are some of his works available in English. He's a really good historian. But besides being a really good historian, he's also a phenomenal communicator. And he doesn't have a podcast, but people record him all the time. And a very, very good guy that I have met, he is basically publishing his speeches online on the podcast. He has created a podcast of his speeches, and those are having a big success.
And hopefully more as time goes on and the technology becomes easier and more comfortable, we'll see more of that.
I think so.
Now, for today's conversation, I'm thinking of this episode as sort of a wrap up of the history of the papacy up until the point that we're at, which I think is a perfect time.
Yes.
Because where I'm going to be releasing this episode is right around the anniversary of my podcast and at the end of the year as well, end of 2019. So I think this is a great time to stop and take a look at things and review a lot of the things that, we've discussed on this podcast, but get a really interesting and new perspective on them. A lot of things that I had no idea about. So I'm really excited to talk about, we'll be talking about a wide range of really interesting topics today. So what do you think we step into this first one, which is Constantine the Great and how he is thought of through the Italian perspective?
So And this is a very interesting question. I think there is here a big difference between the Eastern Christianity and Western Christianity. So in Eastern Christianity, Constantine is always central from the very beginning and up until today. And if you see works of art, Byzantine works of art, or also modern works of art from Eastern Christianity, you see always that, for example, the Council of Nicaea, you see Constantine presiding the council, which, by the way, is true. When you come to Western Christianity, and of course, Italy being very influenced by the papacy, there is a shift. So we will talk more, I think, more in details later. But during the Middle Ages, Constantine was definitely a hero for also the papacy. And he was represented as such, although he's represented always in the light of giving the Pope authority. And we'll talk about the donation of Constantine, of course. But then there is a shift towards the 11th century. And we see this also in art again. When you see a painting, there is a painting, I think, in Rome about the Council of Nicaea. In the painting, Constantine is sitting on a side. In the center, there's the Pope and two archbishops, which, of course, the Pope wasn't there, but that's how it was represented during late medieval times and the Renaissance. And Constantine is on the side, is just one member among many, and is even turning with the back towards the viewer, and he's turning his head. And these kind of paintings really visually explain what the papacy wanted to highlight. The papacy is above the empire because, of course, we are during and after the investiture crisis. So the church always wants to maintain the fact that it is above the powers of the world, and so doesn't want to show Constantine as being so central in the history of Christianity. So that's kind of an important shift. When we get to, I would say, historiography, so the historians, the traditional view was very influenced, of course, by the thinking of the church at the very beginning. So the traditional point of view was that Constantine was a great man, a great of history, a giant that changed history. But as we get into the 19th century in Italy, especially, there is a big influence of Marxism ideology towards the 19th century, especially towards the end. And at that point, Constantine is viewed purely from as a politician. So a politician that made choices for his own interest, not for spiritual reasons. So that's kind of, I think, the point of view that has been prevalent for most of the last 100 years. Recently, that has changed. The modern historians are reevaluating the spirituality of Constantine. So I think that's kind of his role through the centuries, as I can put it very shortly, of course.
Is there any thought in Italy? Well, for the first thing, it's so interesting that when Constantine at the Battle of the Milvian Bridge, there's no record of him ever having actually spoken to the Pope. You would think that after he had this conversion episode, that the first person he would run to would be the Pope. Is there any? Have you come across any thought on that? Okay,
so first of all, the church did not recognize this at all for centuries. In Rome, if you go to one of the most important basilica, San Giovanni Laterano, San John in Lateran, basically the Cathedral of Rome, next to it there's a baptistry, and that is the baptistry for the church for hundreds of years, where Constantine was baptized by the Pope, right there. Which, of course, we know that is not true, but people in the Middle Ages or even in the early modern age did not know that. So they just assumed that was true. So, and the same is true for other points of. So in general, the point of view was that Constantine, of course, met the Pope. He was baptized by the Pope. And then for centuries, everybody believed that the Constantine, when he went to New Rome, he left the church and the West in the care of the Pope, of Pope Sylvester.
Then this is the point where Constantine sets up the new Rome in the Eastern Roman Empire. But at that point, Rome had been fading out as a political entity, and practical power had been moving to other parts of the Italian peninsula. What's the Italian take on that part of the history?
So I will say that until relatively recently, everybody just assumed that the Pope, and I think you mentioned that during your podcast, that the Pope always had the powers that it had, the importance in the Christian church that it had in the following centuries. So if we read with our modern eyes, we read the history, we see that Milan for a time could actually have challenged Rome. Definitely Ambrose as a figure was more powerful during his time in the church than the Pope of the time. I think it was Damasus. So he was more influential, and because he was the Archbishop of the capital, like Constantinople, where but then the capital moved to Ravenna. So that was lost. And the Ravenna Archbishop did gain a role. And for a time, they were trying to say, we are an independent archbishopry. We are above the normal archbishops. So, Rome, treat us with respect. But that never, the Western Roman Empire fell relatively soon after. So it was hard to consolidate such a power as in the Eastern Christianity, where Constantinople really gained all that power.
We're going to shift just a little bit from the role of Constantine, but I have a little question that I didn't propose before. So if you want to punt on it, that's okay. Do you mind if we ask, or if I ask rather, where you're from in Italy?
That's perfectly fine. I'm from a place that nobody knows, so I'm sorry if I can say Rome or Milan. I'm from a small region called Abruzzo. It's just east of Rome, across the mountains. So it's not the center of action for most Italian history, although there are several things. For example, Celestine V, you get there, I think, sooner or later. Mm-hmm. He lived in Abruzzo, and he was famous as Pietro dal Morrone before becoming Pope Celestine. And Morrone is a mountain in Abruzzo. And he was very connected to that land and gave even a special authorization to the main city of the region to host basically a sort of jubilee every year. It's a special jubilee just for that city. Celestine, for the listeners, you haven't gotten there yet, is the famous pope, the only pope before Benedict XVI that actually renounced the papacy.
There's actually, it's interesting, there's a popular English children's story, Stregonona, by Tommy DePaulo, that takes place in Abruzzo.
I didn't know that.
So I think people might be more familiar than you think about Abruzzo.
I did not know that.
And another question I have is maybe not back to this far, but how are you able, with the Italian that's spoken today, how far back are you able to read primary source documents that were written in Italian or a earlier form of Italian?
It's in reality, Italian was born fairly late because Italian is the son of Dante. Before Dante, there were several attempts to establish one of the Italian dialects as Italian, but they all failed. It's only with Dante in the 14th century that Italian is just the dialect of Florence. And it is basically everybody agreed to use the dialect of Florence because Dante wrote the Divina Commedia in his dialect. Before then, it's just Latin. So I have I will say, passable understanding of Latin. So I can read simple stuff in Latin, and I can read Dante time Italian. It's a bit difficult, a bit like reading Chaucer in English, but it is intelligible.
Well, that's really interesting. And I know Italian, a friend of mine, his parents are directly from Italy, and they grew up maybe a few regions apart from each other, and they had a really hard time understanding each other's dialect. Is that still the case today, or is the sort of the national version of Italian pushed those regional dialects to the periphery?
Yes and no. After the Second World War is with the advent of television, that is really when Italian took roots everywhere in the peninsula. Today, everybody can speak in Italian, although often with a few dialect words here and there. And almost nobody can speak in pure dialect. Usually pure dialect survives in the diaspora. So, my relatives in New York speak better dialect than the people today in
that's interesting.
My home village. But I will say it is still the case if somebody's speaking in dialect, it's very hard for an Italian to understand a dialect that is not part of. There are several groups of dialect. So if you're not in that group, it's extremely difficult. I can't understand a Sicilian or a Venetian when they speak in their dialect.
Oh wow, that's fascinating.
It's a lot easier Spanish, but a lot easier.
Oh wow. Now let's dive into, because this is one of the big names that has come up a lot in my podcast. Let's talk about Leo the Great, because he gets the idea as the defender of the faith but he had some controversies too. What do you think, and what was your view on Leo?
So, first of all, I really liked the episode that you did with the history of the Copts, where you put basically Leo in the context of a point of view from the Miafi sides. I will say, not as a criticism, but you mentioned that Leo was one of the few people holding the West together. And this is actually a fairly traditional point of view, so that's nothing particularly controversial, but it has been a bit, I would say, reevaluated by modern historiography. Because the role of the papacy at this point of time was not as big as later events. Later people will look back and think that it was. But the civil government of Italy at the time of Leo was still there and was not disappearing. Actually, Leo was not even the most important person in Rome. The most important person in Rome was the prefectus urbis, the prefect of the city. And there is a very famous episode of Leo visiting Attila, in Italian, Attila the Hun, and basically turning him away from Rome. Modern historiography has debunked that because it's pretty clear if you look at a map that Attila was already going back to modern Hungary. That was where he lived, and was not going towards Rome. And also that embassy was not led by Pope Leo, but was led by the prefect. And the main role, we know this thanks to basically a church an archbishop of the East that wrote about it. And he said, Leo did an embassy and to basically free a few of the people that were captured by the Huns. So it was not that central even in that event. And even after Attila, basically, there was still a government, and the government had not disappeared. It will take several years after the death of Leo to really have the crumbling of the central government in Italy. Now, of course, the provinces were getting away, but Italy was still fairly well controlled by the authorities. And at this point of time, really, that's all they cared about. They cared about Italy.
Yeah, it's definitely a different, a different way to think about Leo. Maybe I was a little too full-throated in my defense of Leo in that episode. The historiography of him, though, it's so interesting, especially that the church puts so much on him.
Yeah, and I think there's a really important reason for that, is that he became a hero because he was he is truly important for church history, as you very well put it, during the Council of Chalcedon and also before that. So he became a hero of the Chalcedonians. So years after his death, they looked back at history and they thought at Leo as their hero, as a figure larger than life. And so they overcharged his figure with meanings that during his time he did not have.
Yeah, and that's a lot what happened with Pope Sylvester, too, during Constantine.
Yes.
That he, many things were ascribed to him that either were just blatant falsities or were completely blown out of proportion, much like the donation of Constantine, which you might speak to, that forgery of a document, which was supposedly Constantine giving authority over a chunk of central Italy directly to the popes, probably wasn't true. Well, it actually wasn't true at all.
Yeah. So the donation of Constantine is a really interesting document because, as we figured out, it surfaces in a very important period of history, which is the 8th or maybe early 9th century. And the donation of Constantine is basically a document that says it's dated basically during the time of Constantine, actually before founding New Rome. And in the document, Constantine gives basically the role, first of all, gives the primacy of Rome above all other sees of Christianity, including Constantinople, which did not exist yet at the time of the supposed date. So that's how it was debunked, one of the reasons. And also gives, this is very important, gives the Pope a sort of vice regency over the West. Basically, it's Constantine saying, I'm going over the East in New Rome, so, you keep an eye here on the West for me. Which, of course, is not true. We know. But again, see it from the point of view of medieval people. They do not have the access that we have to knowledge. So, and they have the highest authority of the time saying this is the truth. So everybody just assumed it was for centuries, until one Italian, actually, very interesting person called Lorenzo Valla. He was a humanist during the humanist era, so during the Renaissance. And, this guy, he knew Greek and Latin inside out, and was a really troublesome person, so always picking fights with everyone. And he picked apart this donation of Constantine with a book in the 15th century, I think, and it wasn't published in Catholic Europe for several years. It took the Reformation to be published, and it was like a bomb under the authority. Really, the authority of the church up until this time was really based on this document. The actual source of authority for not only for the formation, as you said, of the papal states, but the formation of the papal states, the authority of Rome over the other sees, very important, and the authority of Rome over all the kings and emperors and everybody else in the West. This was really important for the papacy.
When the world is just too much, turn it off and turn on positive, encouraging K-Love.
I'm gonna praise.
World
I
off.
praise the mountains.
K-Love on.
K-Love is sunshine for my soul.
I love K-Love.
Listen now on your radio, online, or on the free K-Love app.
K-Love makes me feel so good.
Positive, encouraging K-Love.
AI can help you write, research, and solve problems faster than ever before. But there is a problem. Most AI is built on a worldview that does not reflect biblical truth. That's why Dominion Chat exists. Dominion brings the power of AI under the lordship of Christ. All the benefits of modern AI built on a biblical worldview foundation. Your work matters, but so does your soul. Sign up today at dominion.chat.
A big thing that comes from that time, well, after the fall of the Roman Empire, if you will, the 476 fall of the Roman Empire, that's when the Ostrogoths come in and they set up their kingdom. How do Italians feel about that time period? Because in the English, from what I'm reading, that this is really the beginning of the Dark Ages. How does that fit into the Italian psyche of how that your nation forms? Is that viewed as a high point? Is it ignored? Is it seen as another building block of the puzzle of what would become the Italian identity?
So about this, things have changed dramatically over the years. The traditional point of view of seeing 476 as the end of the Western Empire held for a long time. But recently, I would say recently, after the Second World War, in general, the role of the Ostrogoths has been really reevaluated. We will talk about the Lombards. The Lombards started their reevaluation much earlier. But it became clear that from the sources, the Romans that lived, of course, the Romans did not disappear. There were still Romans after the fall of the Western Roman Empire, and they taught themselves as Romans. When the Ostrogoths came, it's clear from the sources that they thought this was their legitimate government sent from the emperor in the east, from Zeno. And it was very successful, and it's pretty clear that they thought of Theodoric the Great, the great king of the Ostrogoths, as which, by the way, he never called himself king of the Ostrogoths. He was always Rex Italiae, or he called himself Princeps or even Imperator. There's a few occasions where he talks. He just says, "I'm the emperor," and the people in Italy thought of him as the Western Roman Emperor. It's pretty clear about it, and he probably thought of himself as much. So saying that the Western Roman Empire fell in 476 is, I think, a bit a misnomer.
Yeah, I think that's that reevaluation is so important because there's a continuum after the 476 date where Roman institutions were still in place.
Yeah.
And, basically, if you were somebody who was a Roman, you didn't know if in 475 or 478, you didn't know that the Roman Empire had fallen.
No, in fact, because basically what Odoacer did was just saying, okay, now we are subject of Zeno in the East. Even at the time of Odoacer is the king between Theoderic and the last Western Roman emperor. And, as you said, the Senate was still there. All the civil administration, so all the even the consuls were named by Odoacer and then Theoderic. Theoderic was still naming Roman consuls, as a Western Roman emperor will do. So basically, there were two consuls, and one was named by the Eastern emperor and one from the Western emperor, usually. And Theoderic, of course, was naming the Western Roman consul. So all these continues, and we also know that at the time of Theoderic, there were games, there were races at the Circus Maximus. The city was Rome was still a grand city. Of course, had scars. The population was much diminished, but was not the empty shell that will be only 50 years later. This was still a late Roman large metropolis.
And pretty soon after, in the what would really cause the fall of the Ostrogoth kingdom is when the Byzantines came in and tried to reconquer Italy, reconquer is kind of a different, just you could just say conquer Italy. What did that huge thing, the Goths War, what did that do to the Italian peninsula?
These historians, also from the also pretty fairly old historians, Italian historians from the Renaissance and the 18th centuries, recognized that this was really the turning point. The Gothic War, Italy had escaped almost unscathed the barbarian invasions or migrations. There were no real migrations that actually took roots in Italy. The war, the Gothic War, was the most destructive war fought on the Italian peninsula for a millennium. It completely destroyed. I read that the population almost halved, and about between 1/3 and half of the cities were abandoned. And the cities that survived on a much, much diminished state. Because, of course, the war lasted many years. There were sieges and destruction. Many cities changed hands several times, each time with a sack and destruction and all that comes with that. And right in the middle of it, the Justinian plague comes in. So it's really the worst. Because imagine, usually plagues are even more destructive when you are in the middle of a war. Now, imagine how destructive the plague was in the East, where there were no wars. Mm-hmm. And here it comes in Italy in the mid of a hugely destructive war. So this was really the end of times, probably for the people that lived in it. It was for them the end of times. The Italy that they knew did not exist anymore, just coming out of that war. I think a calculation is that the Italian population fell to 3 million people. And imagine that during the Roman Republic, it had been 8-9 million. So like more than 600 years before.
Wow. Now, you mentioned a battle, Voulet, in 507. That's not a battle that often comes up as one of the top European battles, but it was very important. Can you tell us a little bit about that battle and why it was so important?
Yeah, it's a really important battle that happens before the Gothic War. It happens in 507. So Theoderic is the king of Italy, or the Western Roman Emperor. And basically, this is a battle between the Franks and the Visigoths. Now, let's explain a bit. In Italy, we have the kingdom of Theoderic, but over in Toulouse, we have the kingdom of the Visigoths that defeated the Romans at Adrianople. And then after a huge migration, they ended up in Gaul. And they were the most successful of the kingdoms to come out of the fall of the Western Roman Empire. They took most of Gaul and all the Iberian Peninsula. They face again. And the Visigoths are Arians. They face at Vouillé in 507 the Franks of Clovis, and the Franks of Clovis have just converted to let's say Nicene Chalcedonian Christianity, and this is really a turning point because the Franks completely destroy the Visigoths. They conquer Gaul, basically. The Visigoths have to flee to the Iberian Peninsula. By the way, as a effect, Theoderic takes the crown of the Visigoths, so it even enlarges its kingdom to Spain, basically. But the kingdom of the Franks becomes really what is today France, and it is a Catholic, it's a misnomer, but you know what I'm talking about, a Chalcedonian state, and which will remain the protector of the church up until 1870. So it's the effect is pretty long term.
I think if that isn't one of the most major turning points in European history, if the Franks become Arian Christians and ally themselves more towards Theodoric over the Chalcedonian Christianity and the what you might say the Romans, that's a whole different Europe after that.
Yes, I think that's why I think this is so important. Of course, it's not only the battle, but the conversion itself of Clovis. These two events combined, make a real big turning point. And it's hard. Usually people even people that know about history, they don't know about this that much.
Yeah, I had, doing my research, I had no idea how much of Gaul or modern day France that the Visigoths actually held. It was about 2/3 of the country.
Yes. So, and it was also the most important part. It was the part that was richer, with more cities, more developed. So nobody fought, I think, in the Visigothic kingdom. And they held also Spain. So nobody really fought. These Franks, which, by the way, had remained in a small corner of Gaul for most of the 5th century, they had just recently defeated Syagrius, was a leader of the what was left of the Roman Empire in the north. But they were really a newcomer. And this is also a turning point between Mediterranean and I will say Carolingian time. I would say the Northern Europe, because up until this time, the Mediterranean world was always dominating Northern Europe. Mm-hmm. And this is the first time where you have a really strong kingdom, one of the two main kingdoms of Western Christianity at this time that has its basis in North Europe. Is the first time. And actually the Gothic War is the other turning point, because up until that time, nobody knew if Italy or Gaul will become the center of Western Christianity, the strongest states. The destruction of the Italian kingdom by the Romans, by the Eastern Romans, meant that what was left standing was the Frankish kingdom.
Yeah, just a fascinating time period. That leads us into, at about this time, maybe just a little bit later, the next so-called barbarian group comes in, the Lombards. And we talked about the Lombards a bit with our mutual friend, Mike Karate.
Yes.
Of the History of Italy podcast in English. He spoke about the Lombards. Maybe we can talk a little bit more about them, because they're really central in founding what would become the culture and the history of northern Italy and basically the whole peninsula.
Yeah, and by the way, you may know that in London there is a Lombard Street. This is the street it's basically the Wall Street of London, and Lombard Street is the street of the Lombards, which was the way that medieval people called Italians.
Oh, well, that's interesting.
So Italians at that time, people didn't even say, "Oh, this guy is Italian." They say, "This guy is Lombard," and this is long after the Lombard Kingdom had fallen. So it's really important. Of course, you probably know that there's a huge region in Italy called Lombardy, and I will say for most history, Lombardy was pretty much all northern Italy. So yeah, the Lombards are extremely important. They are a turning point also in, first of all, in breaking the unity of the Italian peninsula. So up until this point, Italy is always one political entity. It's just with the Lombards that it starts breaking into pieces, in bits and pieces. First in two pieces, the Roman piece and the Lombard piece, but the Lombards are not united themselves most of the times. So they create that kind of proto-feudal ward of lords and kings, but the lords sometimes answering to the king, sometimes not. And then because Italy is fragmented, the papacy starts to gain a little bit of independence, because up until this time, they were just an important archbishopry of the Roman Empire, like Antioch or Constantinople. But because Italy was fragmented, and they started to gain a bit more role and say in the city of Rome first, and then in the areas around, and then among Italians in general.
It's interesting, too, the name Lombardo is a very common name amongst Italian-American diaspora, if you will. So I wonder if that, if that's more connected to people who came from the Lombardy area. Is that a common last name in Italy?
Yeah, I will say it's definitely not uncommon. Let me specify that Lombards are not only northern Italians. So two of the most important duchies of the Lombards were in the south, and they actually outlasted the kingdom of the Lombards. So the kingdom of the Lombards was conquered by Charlemagne, but the two duchies in the south survived, I believe, up until the Norman conquest in the 11th century. So you can't say the Lombards are only in the north. There were many Lombards in the south. They were all over the city, and they also left a mark in the language. So you are talking about the last name, but there are actually several words. So, for example, your last name, Guerra, comes from a Lombard word. And there are many other, because that's bellum in Latin. It's not nothing similar to so there is usually words about violence tend to be Lombard because, of course, they were a warrior people, so they left a mark there. And there is for example, another word is Fara. Fara was like a sort of a communal village, and in my home region there are several, because there were Lombards also in Abruzzo. There are two villages called Fara. One is called Fara Filiorum Petri, which really is Fara of the sons of Peter.
Mm-hmm. Now, the Lombards, though, they acculturated and became a part of the Italian society quite quickly. I mean, in the scope of history, how long did it last where they were speaking their own language and had their own separate culture?
It's complicated, but I would say it took just a few generations for them to, and for both, it actually was both sides. So the Lombards took the language and a lot of the customs of their subjects, but the Italians, they took the identity from the Lombards. So in just a matter of few generations, so at the beginning, when you excavate a tomb, usually the tombs are what's left of this time. It's pretty dark time. You clearly see right after the conquest, you see a tomb of the Lombards and a tomb of the Italians. So the tomb of the Lombards has all the weapons buried in there, like it's a custom, Germanic custom. Whereas the Italians, they don't bury anything with the body. And you see that the Lombards are taller and the Italians are a bit smaller. You see a few of these things, but just a few generations, 2-3 generations after, you start seeing that they are mixed up and you can't really read anymore any difference. And of course, there probably were some differences that remained, but not so many. And also the very important thing is the ethnogenesis. This is very important, of the Italians that changed their identity from Roman to Lombard. So the people that lived under the Lombards, after some time, they started of calling themselves Lombard, especially after the Lombards converted to the Catholic religion. So which I think happened in the 7th century. So when they converted, there was no more barrier basically to call yourself Lombard. And that's what happened.
There's another aspect of this time period, in that in many parts of the Italian peninsula, there was a very strong Greek flavor. And the use of Greek, and especially connections back to the Byzantines and how the Greeks and the Eastern Romans performed religious rites. And what was going on with them at that time? Was it as much as what you might imagine of how much Greek influence there was?
So the route today, if you visit Italy, you immediately see a difference when you travel from the north to the south or vice versa. And most people think that the root of this divide is really in the difference of civilization. Especially when Charlemagne come into power, Charlemagne conquers the center and north of the country, whereas the south remains in the hands of these small Lombard duchies, but especially of the Byzantines. And this has extremely profound and long-term implications, because the culture of southern Italy is much closer to Greece than say central North Italy, which are really what I would call the Charlemagne Europe. So central North Italy are much closer to Germany and France, because they were part of the same political entity and identity as well, the Carolingian feudal Europe versus the imperial Byzantine South. So this has really long-lasting impact. The Byzantine remained in southern Italy up until the 11th century, but even after they were gone for a long time, there were connections, although they really frailed with the Great Schism.
When the world is just too much, turn it off and turn on positive, encouraging K-Love.
I'm gonna praise.
World off. K-Love on.
K-Love is sunshine for my soul.
I love K-Love.
Listen now on your radio, online, or on the free K-Love app.
K-Love makes me feel so good.
Positive, encouraging K-Love.
AI can help you write, research, and solve problems faster than ever before. But there is a problem. Most AI is built on a worldview that does not reflect biblical truth. That's why Dominion Chat exists. Dominion brings the power of AI under the lordship of Christ. All the benefits of modern AI built on a biblical worldview foundation. Your work matters, but so does your soul. Sign up today at dominion.chat.
This is the time period where the Carolingians become a power in the in Northern Europe, and then they spread into Northern Italy. What impact did they have on the development of history at that point?
Of course, it's enormous. So when Charlemagne conquered the Lombard kingdom, first of all, for the first time, that kingdom had been growing for centuries, and bit by bit had conquered most Italy, and was really on the verge of conquering Rome. That is why, of course, the papacy called in the Franks to defeat the Lombards. It really created a political unity of this Charlemagne Europe, which still exists today. This is the root of Western civilization. I really think the Western civilization is a successor civilization to the ancient civilizations and the beginning of the Middle Age, when you create this enormous empire stretching from Gaul to Hungary, from the Black Sea to Rome. And this empire is, in name, is Roman. It's just a Roman empire. The Pope is basically using the power that is assuming, using the donation of Constantine to transfer the title of emperor to Charlemagne. Let me maybe back one bit. So the papacy was under the Byzantines. It's called the Byzantine papacy. I think you're talking about this right now. And it was really connected to the Byzantine Empire during the 7th century. In the 8th century, something really changes because you have iconoclasm the word is difficult in English for me. Yeah. In Byzantium, as a reaction to the defeats they have had vis-a-vis the Muslim world. So basically, if I can simplify it, they are trying the emperors that are the iconoclast emperors are trying to get to a purer form of Christianity as they fought it, and in a way a bit more monotheistic. So more similar in a way to the Muslim religion, which was so successful at the time and had put Byzantium under siege and almost conquered it, and was the Emperor Leo that defeated that invasion that started iconoclastism. This is really the turning point in starting to put a wedge between East and West, and the papacy is totally against it. And in a way is not even comfortable with the solution that is found after when iconoclastism is defeated, and basically the solution that they have is that in the East is that we can adore icons, and this doesn't sit very well also with the papacy. So there is a growing distance between the papacy and the East. But the really turning point, again, let's go to another turning point that is overlooked, is not even Charlemagne, I think, and it's Pepin, the king that comes before Charlemagne. So he was basically he was the last heir of a dynasty of, I would say, if you remember Lord of the Rings, you have the superintendents and then you have the kings. They were the superintendents. The kings were the Merovingians, but the kings were in name only. And Pepin finally goes to, talks to the Pope and says, I would like to be crowned king. And I think the only authority that could cancel the authority of the Merovingians that goes back 3 centuries, is you. And this is the moment when the papacy moves from Eastern Christianity. We're about 750, so in the mid of the 8th century, from Eastern Christianity to the Western Christianity. It says, okay, I will crown you, I will make you king. And the papacy gets a new protector in the kingdom of the Franks. And then about 40 years later, when they need the help against the Lombards, then Charlemagne, the heir of Pepin, comes into Italy and destroys the Lombard kingdom.
Yeah, that's where it gets really interesting, that transition. The papacy, as a religious institution, didn't have its own political, secular political institution. So they really had to be connected to a kingdom or an emperor. And that's pretty much how all of Christianity up to that point was. But then this is the point in time where the papacy is starting to develop its own political power, secular political power.
And at this time, the donation of Constantine is forged. So exactly at the time when the papacy needs to have a source of its authority, saying, okay, yes, we want to have an authority over the kings and the emperors, but where is the source of the legitimacy for that? And that is the donation of Constantine. Constantine, the first Christian emperor, gives the Pope, the Archbishop of Rome, the role of being a sort of vice regent in the West. So they have kept that power for all these centuries. That's what they say, of course, saying, we've always been in this position, and now we are granting our approval for the Frankish kings to become kings and then to become emperors. And the source of the authority is us. Is not the previous emperor like it was in Byzantium. It's the source of legitimacy is us. We are the only one that can give you the legitimacy to be called yourself emperor.
If that authority is given to them by Pepin, then the next emperor of the Franks, the next Carolingian, can take that away.
Of course.
Where if you have that legitimacy that's ancient, that goes back to the most important figure in secular person in Christian history, then that's something nobody can take away. At least they can't take it away legitimately. You can always say that it's illegitimate.
Exactly. Of course, the emperors and popes will fight endlessly about this, but they have established a really good reason for having that authority. And they even justify the crowning of Charlemagne, the Pope of the time, says because the Roman throne is vacant. Because at that time, Irene is the first Roman empress, by de jure, not just. There were several de facto, I think, but she's the first de jure. And they say, oh, this is a woman. She can't be emperor. So, of course, the throne is vacant. So, because we have this authority coming from Constantine, we move the throne from Byzantium and we give it to the great leader of Christianity, Charlemagne.
Yeah, at this point, we're getting a little bit ahead of where the published podcast episodes are, but these are all events that are coming up very soon. I mean, like you said, in 751, that's when you really get that changeover from Byzantine to Carolingian. And what's so fascinating about this time is that institutions, even families, important ruling families, they're being established right now in the 750s and the 800s and the 900s that will last until the Renaissance and the early modern period and beyond.
Well, if you think the crown that was given to Charlemagne was only renounced in Napoleonic time, so that how long it lasted. That crown lasted 1,000 years.
The big ruling families of the Orsinis and the Colonnas from
Yes,
from Rome. I think, if I'm not mistaken, the last Orsini or Colonna Pope was maybe in the 1800s.
Yeah, but they were an important families up until actually also after, but they were still around at Italian unity time. So they weren't becoming Pope anymore, but they were very important families. And by the way, one of them was also the kind of the lord of my village, the village where I was born, the Colonna.
I mean, 1,000-year run for a family is not, I mean, that's nothing to wink at.
Well, there is a family in Rome. Well, it's probably a legend, but they are the Massimo, one of the biggest noble family, the black nobility, it's called. And basically there is a saying that Napoleon met one of the Massimo and he said, well, is it true that there's a story that you are descendant of Quintus Fabius Maximus, the famous for the wars against Hannibal. So, almost 2,000 years before. He said, yeah, it's a story that has been in the family for 2,000 years.
I mean that there's probably a healthy chunk of legend too.
Yeah, I think so.
But I think so. These divisions, like the Guelph and Ghibellini factions that split off. I mean, these are things that are factions that carry through for hundreds of years. I mean, and it's all starting at this kind of murky time where you might, it's not quite as popular to call it today the Dark Ages, but, they're formulating in this time that, there's not a lot of records, but it's coming out of this just fascinating time of change. And it carries through.
Yeah. And I would say that Italian historiography from the 18th century has identified this time of as the real birth of the Western civilization. So the civilization that today we call the West. So it's not the Renaissance, it's not the High Middle Ages, but it's Carolingian time, right before and after. This is the real birth of a new Europe, a Western Christianity Europe that is definitely different from its Roman past, and it's definitely different from Eastern Christianity, from the Roman Empire, the Eastern Roman Empire, the Byzantine Empire. So here is when Europe starts taking its shape and becoming the Europe that will develop into the Western Christianity and then in the West.
As a way to maybe wrap up today, we talked a lot of history really depends on the historiography of how things are seen. How has the view of the grand scope of Italian history, of how scholars view it and how it's viewed in the popular imagination changed over time?
So, of course, here we have to make a difference between popular imagination and historiography. So popular imagination, of course, we, as Italians, we all, many of us learn some Latin. We really are born with a lot of histories from the ancient time, which are, I would say, everyday. There's even a B movie about Attila. Okay, and it's in the 80s, because everybody knows about Attila, the Hun, and about conquering Rome, etc. So that's popular history. I would say as historiography, Italy had a really strong historiography during the Renaissance, 17th and 18th century, and which influenced, by the way, the rest of Europe. And here is where there is a bit of difference with maybe with the Anglo-Saxon tradition that really looks at history. The really important historian is Gibbons, of course, and he sees history in a very traditional way, in a way saying, okay, there is the ancient world, and then unfortunately started decaying basically as soon as the Roman Empire is founded, and then it falls for 500 years. And then there's this really dark Middle Ages. And then finally we are back with the Kingdom of Reason. I will say the Italian historiography is very different, even at contemporaries of Gibbons, like Muratori and Vico. These are the two biggest names. They looked at Longobardi is the Italian name of the Lombards, as a really defining time, and as medieval Europe in general, as the birth of European civilization. So they have a very different point of view. And I will say that's kind of remained the most popular view of Italian historians up until the late 19th century, when really Marxism coming from Germany influenced heavily culture in Italy. And most historians of the late 19th and early 20th century are very positivist, like looking at the and from an evolutionary point of view at history, and that's kind of the view. And they were, in a way, reacting to traditional Catholic point of view of history. So maybe they overcompensated in a way, trying. So the earlier generations were maybe a bit too pious, and they were a bit on the other end. So that's kind of, I will say, after the Second World War, the position is shifted a little bit more towards the middle of these 2 points.
Well, I've had so much fun. We've barely scratched the surface of all these different topics, but I think you've really given me a whole different way of looking at history. And that's what I love about collaborations like this, is getting a different view and changing and giving myself a different way of thinking of these really fascinating times in history. So I want to thank you so much.
No, I have to thank you because, as I said at the beginning, really the work you do with the history of the Christian church is really like nothing that there is, and really helped me understand the history of the early church in a way I've never done.
Oh, thank you so much. You're too kind. Mille grazie. I should edit out all my bad Italian. We shouldn't even. I shouldn't try.
It's okay.
But really,
grazie.
there's so many different things that we could definitely talk about. So I really do hope that you consider coming back on again, and maybe we can zero in and really
whenever
drill
you
down.
Want. Yeah, well, really, whenever you want, and anytime, as you go through the history of the papacy, I think Italy will come out
once or twice, a couple of times.
A couple of times. So even well beyond the times that we have talked about, and really we get into really pieces of extremely interesting piece of history when the popes become really political actors in the Italian peninsula. So it gets really interesting.
If people want to listen to your podcast, now your podcast is in Italian, but you put out a lot of information on social media, which is much more easily translated. How can people learn about your podcast and connect to your website and social media?
So I post, this is one thing that I do. I try to post on social media things that complement the podcast. So I talk about things that I'm sure when you do research, you put maybe 20% of what you read into the podcast. And so do I. So I try to put a bit of the 80% that is left on social media. So people can find me on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. It's always Italia Storia, written Italia. Storia is STORIA.
And I'll include all this in the show notes as well.
So you go Italia Storia, Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, you can find it, and usually you click translate and it's pretty obvious. A lot of people follow me that are not Italian speakers. And of course, if you want to listen to the podcast and you want to improve your Italian as well, it's Storia d'Italia. And of course, it will be on the notes, so it's okay. But you can find it on any platform. And I have a website also, italiastoria.com. and there I have sources and maps, and I also publish the text of the podcast.
Yeah, that is an excellent way to learn another language and to brush up on your language, especially to hear native speakers speaking about interesting topics. And it's wonderful that you have the transcripts on there as well. So if you're out there and you're, want to brush up on your Italian, I think there's no better way to do it, than that. That's putting on my professional hat as an English teacher.
Right, and I get the emails all the time of people, I got from Brazil, from America, from the Czech Republic, saying, really thank you, because I get to take two birds with one stone, basically.
Well, thank you again, Marco. Thank you so much, and we will definitely be talking to you again soon.
No, thank you, Steve, for having me on your show.
When the world is just too much, turn it off and turn on positive, encouraging K-Love.
I'm gonna praise.
World off. K-Love on.
K-Love is sunshine for my soul.
I love K-Love.
Listen now on your radio, online, or on the free K-Love app.
K-Love makes me feel so good.
Positive, encouraging K-Love.
AI can help you write, research, and solve problems faster than ever before. But there is a problem. Most AI is built on a worldview that does not reflect biblical truth. That's why Dominion Chat exists. Dominion brings the power of AI under the lordship of Christ. All the benefits of modern AI built on a biblical worldview foundation. Your work matters, but so does your soul. Sign up today at dominion.chat.